Hey, how's it going guys, Kris here, and today's video is going to be all about the new War in the Pacific update that's recently hit Battlefield 5. I'll be giving my general opinions on it and talking about the game's future, whether or not I think it'll be able to survive for the long run. By the way, just a heads up to why I keep on stabbing the air every few seconds on the gameplay behind. Basically, because I use the alternate soldier button layout, the update switched the slide action over to the melee button, so don't worry, I've not gone mad. Just forgot to assign it back to the crouch button when I loaded the game up. But anyway, just in case you didn't know, I'll quickly summarise some stuff. War in the Pacific is totally free to download and play now if you've got Battlefield 5. It currently consists of 2 maps, Iwo Jima, which is a battered landscape featuring a nice variety of large, open, sniper-friendly spaces, along with a bunch of narrow, claustrophobic tunnels that fit in very well with close-quarter combat weapons, like the shotguns and the SMGs. The second map, on the other hand, is called Pacific Storm, which has taken a lot of inspiration from Battlefield 4's Paracel Storm, being set on some gorgeous-looking tropical islands surrounded by trees and foliage. But of course, just like in Paracel Storm, the map could suddenly be hit by, you guessed it, a big friggin' storm, quickly switching the map over from a tropical paradise to a much darker, more menacing backdrop, giving it a lot of contrast and making it one of the more dynamic maps in the game so far. Definitely an interesting one to play. If the name doesn't give it away, the War in the Pacific centres around the battles between the US Armed Forces and the Imperial Japanese Army, giving us 2 new factions to play as, a bunch of new cosmetics, and of course, some lovely new guns and vehicles to play around with too. So there's a pretty nice chunk of content that's been added here. And that's not all either, because we're scheduled to get another Pacific map too, Wake Island, which is a fan favourite from Battlefield 1942, remade with the current Frostbite engine. And that should be coming out fairly soon, sometime in December. Now, after sinking a load of hours into the 2 maps and checking out all of the stuff the update has to offer, I can honestly say that it took me by surprise. As a lot of you guys probably know, I've not exactly been one of Battlefield 5's biggest fans. I've still made content on it, but I've struggled to really enjoy the game and feel very optimistic about its future. This update has proven to me that DICE can still make solid content for the game, and for the first time in God knows how long, this actually gets me a bit excited about what the future could hold for it. War in the Pacific is the update that Battlefield 5 desperately needed. It was the thing that was either going to make or break the game, and it was probably DICE's last chance to really show us that Battlefield 5 can be salvaged, even with all the problems and bad decision making it's gone through since pretty much the beginning. I'll admit that some of the post-launch maps have been some of the better ones in the game. Mercury is still up there as one of my favourites, and Operation Underground is probably better than the map that inspired it, Operation Metro, which we saw in Battlefields 3 and 4. But the 2 new Pacific maps are a little bit different to everything we've seen in the game so far, because it adds something to Battlefield 5 that the fans have been asking for, right from the very start. Proper, iconic World War II battles that not only feel more in line with the history books, but also actually feel satisfying to play, basically making the game feel more like Battlefield. They're both built with the Breakthrough game mode in mind, following a similar sort of design to how Battlefield 1's maps were made to fit in with its Operations game mode, hence why they were so fun to play on that mode, because the action flows nicely through the map, providing a nice balance of cover for both the attackers and defenders, all whilst making different sections feel distinct and memorable. It's definitely evident that this is the case, because the 2 new maps are really fun to play on Breakthrough, being pretty large and open and having plenty of flanking routes, all whilst working well with the game's 64 player capacity, giving a sense of a large-scale invasion, as opposed to a clustered mess that ruins the flow, being set along predictable lanes and areas that are a pain in the arse to flank, which is unfortunately the case with a few of the other maps in the game. With that said, the 2 maps feel massively different to each other in the way they're structured, and of course, the way they look. Iwo Jima is a much more barren and war-stricken map, designed around volcanic beaches and scarred landscapes to give it a really moody demeanour. And personally, I find this one flows a bit more fluidly and feels like the closest thing in the game to one of Battlefield 1's operations, being designed in a way that gives the attackers a huge sense of accomplishment when overrunning an enemy position and pushing them back, and giving the defenders some great vantage points for picking off oncoming attackers, by giving them lots of space to set up ambushes, and giving them the high ground. Having the high ground goes pretty well with volcanic places. The map works perfectly on Breakthrough, and because there's a variety of ways you can choose to attack and defend, flanking as infantry, rolling straight up through in tanks, or raining death from above in planes, it definitely makes it one of the most atmospheric maps in the game, with chaos being pretty much everywhere. Pacific Storm, on the other hand, is totally different, being a much more beautiful combat zone, taking place over several different islands which you'll be hopping to and from to defend and attack. This is much easier on the eye, also feeling quite atmospheric too, especially when that storm comes rolling in, trees start blowing around in the wind, and lightning shoots across the sky, completely flipping the mood. Although it's probably the most interesting map of the two from an aesthetic point of view, I don't think it flows quite as well as Iwo Jima, mainly down to it having so much foliage, which players can hide within, and often be much harder to track. This can go in favour for both the attackers and the defenders, because the attackers can sneak through the bushes to flank their enemies' positions, whereas the defenders can obviously just sit around in said bushes to conceal their whereabouts, while scanning for potential victims. Though it can often lead to a lot of unexpected and unavoidable deaths from people essentially just hiding amongst the greenery, making it a slightly harder map to survive on. Though I'll still say that in comparison to most of the other maps in Battlefield 5, it is one of the more enjoyable maps to play on, having lots of cool areas and potential Battlefield moments. Also having a decent layout for the breakthrough game mode as well, especially after you get past the first section anyway. So basically, in my eyes, War in the Pacific has been a success. DICE brought out an epic trailer, one of the best trailers in Battlefield's history, I should probably add. It covered an area of combat that the fans had been wanting since the game was announced, an actual World War II event, the Pacific Front with the Americans and Japanese, and it delivered on the content, giving us lots of new toys to play around with on some pretty solid maps. So could this be Battlefield 5's 180 moment, where it makes a tremendous comeback? With Wake Island coming up pretty soon and plenty more content scheduled to be released over 2020, you never know. The game's quite frankly had a pretty miserable first year, and despite some of the post-release content actually being fairly good, to be fair, this is the first clear sign that Battlefield 5 could be saved, and go on to be a much better game than most of us could have ever predicted. I think DICE really need to start focusing on those real-life World War II battles, just like they did with the Pacific, which at this point in time is what most of the fans actually want. Covering the whole unexpected theatres of war and taking us to lesser known battles and war-torn places was an interesting concept, but let's be honest here, it didn't really pay off. And if anything, it made most of the game feel like a sort of World War II spin-off title, which could be one of the reasons why most of its maps lacked so much atmosphere and authenticity. They need to scrap this idea now and start building a game which features more of those iconic World War II battles that we all know well, and could be executed really nicely with the Frostbite engine. The Pacific is a clear example of this. I think if DICE decide to do this and basically replicate what they've just done with the latest chapter by honing in on well-known theatres, crafting awesome trailers to build hype, and providing us with some kick-ass content and maps, then I do feel quite optimistic about Battlefield 5's future. Although it's been perceived as a dead game for most of the year, and a lot of people will still say it is because they've completely given up with it, which I can honestly understand. I've been pretty close to completely abandoning it altogether on my channel, but I do think that there is essentially a new hope for the game now, especially if they start pushing out more content like they've just done. The beach landing on Iwo Jima proves that DICE could probably design a solid map for Omaha Beach and the Normandy landings. The idea of Battlefield 5 taking us to the Battle of the Bulge, Battle of Stalingrad with the Russians, Operation Market Garden, there's just so many places the game needs to go now. And because it's recently been announced that the next Battlefield game won't be coming out until at least 2021, this gives DICE another whole year to properly pad Battlefield 5 out with tons of content that the fans really want, all whilst bringing Rush back and keeping it there without making it time limited, and possibly giving us RSP servers too at some point to pick and choose map rotations and weapon choices, so some might want to ban those pesky MMGs for example. There is a lot of potential here, and Battlefield 5 could evolve into a great game after all, but it's completely up to DICE to make that happen. They really need to listen to the community as much as possible going forward, properly identifying the stuff that the fans do and don't want, and then crafting their future content around that. And if they manage to give us more content on the same par as the Pacific, and they can do that quite frequently over the next year, building hype for every new chapter along the way, then I'm pretty certain that a lot of the fans that left will be surely tempted to come back. If you're one of those guys, I'd at least suggest trying out the Pacific stuff for yourself and seeing whether you like it or not. It might not be for everyone, but as someone who's been a bit skeptical of Battlefield 5's success, I've been enjoying the new maps and content quite a lot, and hopefully this could be the start of the game's resurgence. But of course, these are all just my opinions at the end of the day, and everyone's got their own viewpoints. So if you played Battlefield 5's War in the Pacific, What do you think of it? And would you be excited to see more large-scale, iconic battles come to Battlefield 5 in the future? And if so, which ones? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching guys, give me a like to show your support, and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be the first to see new content coming up soon. Take it easy, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.